At 4:37 a.m. on September 19, 2025, Ukrainian Su-27 pilot Major Andriy Kovalenko watches frost crystals form on his canopy at Starokostiantynov Air Base, 130 kilometers west of Kyiv. His mission briefing was 42 minutes ago. The target sits 190 kilometers behind Russian lines near Mariupol. A forward logistics hub the Russians call Distribution Point Azov. Intelligence reports it holds 340 trucks, 80 armored vehicles, and ammunition stockpiles supporting Russian forces across the southern front. Destroying it could disrupt operations for weeks. The problem is surviving long enough to release his weapons. Between Kovalenko and his target lies the most sophisticated air defense network Russia has deployed since the war began. 12 S-300 systems creating overlapping engagement zones, 47 Pantsir units providing short-range coverage, electronic warfare systems jamming GPS across 400 square kilometers, and Russian Su-35 fighters on combat air patrol. Their radars sweeping the sky every 8 seconds. Conventional wisdom says Ukrainian jets cannot operate this deep behind enemy lines. Conventional wisdom is about to be proven catastrophically wrong. Kovalenko's Su-27 carries 4 Storm Shadow cruise missiles, each costing $1,800,000. The missiles have a range of 250 kilometers, enough to strike the target without penetrating Russian air defenses. But there is a complication. Russian electronic warfare has been jamming GPS signals across the entire operational area for 6 days. Storm Shadow relies on GPS for mid-course navigation. Without it, the missiles become expensive paperweights with circular error probability expanding from 3 meters to 60 meters. The difference between hitting an ammunition bunker and hitting empty dirt. But Ukrainian engineers have spent 3 months solving this exact problem. They have modified the Storm Shadow's guidance package, integrating it with Ukrainian-developed terrain mapping software. The missile can now navigate using optical terrain recognition, comparing what its camera sees to preloaded satellite imagery. It is slower, requires more processing power, but it works without GPS. The modification costs $12,000 per missile. It defeats $16 million worth of Russian jamming equipment. At 4:41 a.m., Kovalenko starts his engines. The Lyulka AL-31 turbofans spool up with a rising howl that echoes across the frozen taxiway. His wingman, Captain Yuri Bondar, powers up 30 seconds later in the adjacent revetment. 2 jets, 8 missiles. 190 kilometers to target. The mission clock starts now. They take off at 4:48 a.m., afterburners lighting the pre-dawn darkness. The Su-27s climb through 7,000 feet, then level, off, staying below Russian radar coverage. This is terrain masking flight using the rolling Ukrainian landscape to break enemy radar line of sight. The flight path has been calculated down to the second. They will fly north initially, away from the target, making Russian air defense operators think they are conducting routine patrols. Then, at a pre-planned waypoint, they will turn east, drop to 300 feet, and race toward the target at 640 kilometers per hour. Total flight time to weapon release, 18 minutes. At 4:53 a.m., Russian radar operators at an S-300 site near Melitopol detect 2 aircraft contacts heading north at medium altitude. Classification: probable patrol mission. Threat assessment: low. This is exactly what Ukrainian mission planners wanted them to think. The deception plan relies on pattern recognition. For 3 weeks, Ukrainian jets have flown similar profiles, always turning back before approaching Russian positions. The Russians have learned to ignore these flights, treating them as reconnaissance missions gathering electronic intelligence. Today, the pattern breaks. At 4:56 a.m., both Su-27s execute hard left turns, rolling into steep banks that bleed off altitude. They drop from 7,000 feet to 300 feet in 40 seconds, their radar altimeters screaming warnings as they level off barely above the trees. This is where training matters. Both pilots have logged 200 hours practicing ultra-low-level flight. At 300 feet and 640 kilometers per hour, Reaction time to obstacles is measured in fractions of seconds. One mistake means becoming a crater in a Ukrainian wheat field. They cross into Russian-controlled territory at 4:59 a.m., threading between two S-300 engagement zones. The gap is only 8 kilometers wide, identified by Ukrainian signals intelligence teams tracking Russian radar emissions for 6 months. The Russians believe the gap is covered by overlapping coverage from adjacent systems. They are wrong. The terrain creates a radar shadow neither system can penetrate. At 500 feet above ground, flying through darkness with only terrain mapping radar for guidance, the two jets are invisible to Russian air defenses, but they are not invisible to everything. A Russian Su-35 on combat air patrol orbiting at 20,000 feet near Berdyansk detects something on its look-down radar. Two fast-moving contacts at very low altitude, heading east. The Russian pilot radios his controller, requesting permission to investigate. Permission is granted. The Su-35 rolls into a diving turn, afterburners lit, accelerating toward intercept. Closure rate, 1,200 kilometers per hour. Time to visual contact, 4 minutes. In his cockpit, Kovalenko's radar warning receiver begins chirping, the distinctive warble of an N-035. Radar, the Su-35's fire control system. Range, 62 kilometers. The Russian fighter is closing fast. This is the moment the mission planners anticipated, the moment everything depends on timing and discipline. Kovalenko does not turn, does not climb, does not deviate from his course. Any defensive maneuver now will delay weapon release, and they are already inside the narrow time window where the missiles can reach their target. He keys his radio once, a prearranged signal to his wingman. Hold course. Trust the plan. At 5:04 a.m., the Su-35 closed to 48 kilometers. Its radar achieves missile lock. The Russian pilot arms two R-77 missiles, each with a range of 110 kilometers. Against targets flying at low altitude, effective range drops to 35 kilometers due to ground clutter. He needs to close another 13 kilometers before firing. The Ukrainian jets scream across the landscape at 300 feet, their wingtips nearly brushing treetops. Towns flash past beneath them, dark and silent. Russian occupied territory spreads in every direction. At 5:06 a.m., the Russian fighter closed to 37 kilometers, almost in range. That is when the trap springs. From a concealed position near Zaporizhzhia, 112 kilometers behind Ukrainian lines, an S-300 system operated by Ukrainian forces activates. It is a captured Russian system, taken intact during the Kharkiv counteroffensive in September 2022. Ukrainian crews have spent 2 years learning to operate it with perfect proficiency. The S-300's 48 N6E radar illuminates the Russian Su-35 from an unexpected direction. The Russian pilot's threat warning system explodes with alarms. His display shows a missile launch from behind Ukrainian lines, tracking his aircraft. He has 3 seconds to decide: continue pursuit of the Ukrainian jets or defend himself. He chooses survival. Breaking off his attack run, he rolls inverted and dives, deploying chaff and flares. The Ukrainian S-300's 48 N6E missile follows him down, its proximity fuse detonating at 83 meters. Shrapnel tears through the Su-35's right engine. Fire warnings blare. The pilot initiates emergency shutdown, then turns west on one engine, limping toward friendly airspace. The threat is neutralized. Kovalenko and Bondar continue east, unmolested. At 5:08 a.m., they reach their launch point, 23 kilometers from distribution point Azov. Still flying at 300 feet, they pull up sharply, climbing to missile release altitude of 6,000 feet. Both jets are now exposed to Russian air defenses. Every radar system within 80 kilometers immediately achieves track. Multiple S-300 batteries begin missile launch sequences, but Ukrainian mission planning accounts for this too. At 5:09 a.m., Exactly as the Su-27s begin their climb, 6 Ukrainian decoy drones activate across a 120-kilometer front. Each drone broadcasts electronic signatures, mimicking Su-27 radar returns. To Russian air defense operators, it appears 12 Ukrainian jets are attacking simultaneously from multiple directions. Confusion spreads through Russian command networks. Which targets are real? Which are decoys? Missile systems lock onto phantom targets. Launch authorization is delayed while operators attempt threat assessment. That delay is fatal. At 5:09:47 a.m., Kovalenko pickles all 4 Storm Shadow missiles in rapid succession. Each weapon drops cleanly, rocket motors igniting 2 seconds later. The missiles accelerate to Mach 0.8, descending back to low altitude as their terrain mapping systems activate. Bondar releases his 4 missiles 16 seconds later. 8 Storm Shadow cruise missiles are now racing toward distribution point Azov at 964 kilometers per hour, flying 50 meters above ground, navigating by comparing camera imagery to preloaded maps. The Ukrainian jets do not wait to observe results. The instant their weapons are away, both pilots roll inverted and dive back towards the deck, trading altitude for speed. They will aggress the same way they came, threading through the radar gap, staying below detection threshold. At 5:11 a.m., Russian air defenses finally achieve firing solutions on the Ukrainian jets. 3 S-300 systems launch missiles, but the targets are already below minimum engagement altitude, lost in ground clutter. The missiles detonate harmlessly at maximum range, their semi-active radar seekers finding nothing but terrain returns. The Storm Shadow missiles continue their flight unmolested. At 5:13 a.m., the first missile arrives over distribution point Azov. Its terminal guidance system identifies the largest structure, a munitions storage warehouse measuring 90 meters by 42 meters. The missile's 800-pound Broach warhead penetrates the roof, then detonates inside. The explosion triggers sympathetic detonations across 4,000 tons of stored ammunition. Artillery shells, tank rounds, mortar bombs, and rocket warheads detonate in a cascading chain reaction. The blast is equivalent to 93 tons of TNT. The warehouse vaporizes. The shockwave flattens structures within 300 meters. Windows shatter in Mariupol, 14 kilometers away. The second missile impacts 6 seconds later, hitting the vehicle park where 340 trucks are staged for morning convoy operations. Fuel tanks rupture. Secondary explosions ripple through parked vehicles. 83 trucks are destroyed in the first 30 seconds. Missiles 3 through 8 impact across the compound at 7-second intervals, each strike precisely calculated to maximize damage. Command bunkers collapse. Fuel storage tanks rupture and ignite. The eastern motor pool, holding 80 armored vehicles, becomes a sea of burning wreckage. By 5:14 a.m., distribution point Azov has ceased to exist. The damage assessment comes from satellite imagery captured at first light. The compound is unrecognizable. Every major structure is destroyed or burning. Smoke rises 7,000 feet, visible from Russian positions across the entire southern front. Russian losses: 340 trucks destroyed. Unit replacement cost $92 million. 80 armored vehicles destroyed, $68 million. 4,000 tons of ammunition. Estimated value, $214 million. Infrastructure damage, $87 million. Total, $461 million, plus 192 Russian soldiers killed, 74 wounded in the initial strikes. Ukrainian expenditure, 8 Storm Shadow missiles at $1,800,000, each equals $14,400,000. Fuel and maintenance for 2 Su-27s, $23,000. 1 S-300 missile used as defensive counter-air, $1,200,000. Total mission cost, $15,623,000. Return on investment, for every dollar Ukraine spent, Russia lost $29.52 in equipment and supplies. Kovalenko and Bondar land at Starokostiantynivka at 5:31 a.m., 54 minutes after takeoff. Ground crews swarm their jets, already preparing them for the next mission. In the operations center, intelligence officers are selecting tomorrow's target because the mission proves something Russian commanders desperately do not want to believe. Ukrainian jets can strike deep into occupied territory, defeat sophisticated air defenses, and return safely. The asymmetric advantage Russia believed it possessed, overwhelming air defense coverage, has been systematically dismantled by Ukrainian innovation. Within 24 hours of the strike, Russian logistics commanders issue new directives. All forward supply depots must be dispersed into smaller, concealed locations. Concentration of supplies is prohibited within 150 kilometers of the front line. Ammunition stockpiles must be moved every 72 hours. Every countermeasure reduces efficiency. Dispersed logistics means longer supply lines, increased fuel consumption, more trucks vulnerable to drone strikes. Moving ammunition constantly prevents effective distribution to frontline units. The strategic impact exceeds the physical destruction. Russia must now defend everywhere, which means defending nowhere effectively. Ukrainian planners can force Russia to expend billions protecting infrastructure or accept mounting losses to precision strikes, costing a fraction of the damage they inflict. 2 Ukrainian jets, 18 minutes. Over enemy territory, $461 million in Russian losses. The mathematics of modern warfare have shifted decisively in Ukraine's favor. If you found this tactical analysis valuable, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more in-depth breakdowns of how Ukraine continues to innovate against a numerically superior adversary. Drop your thoughts in the comments about what target you think Ukraine should strike next.